Hi everyone, and welcome to the adjustment tutorials for the shadow. So you can use these adjustments on both the hoodie and the tunic. I'm going to show you how to do them based on the tunic version. So there's two tutorials in this video. The first is the shortening or lengthening if you want to, and then the second will be the full bust adjustment. So let's get started on the lengthening adjustment, which is shortening as well, simply because when we do adjust patterns, that should be the first adjustment we make. These patterns are designed for a height of 5'6", and this is a long pattern, so I readily understand that most of you will need to shorten it. The quick and dirty way, of course, of shortening it is to just come up from the hemline however much you want to, and chop off that same amount all the way along. And because this is a curve, you just have to make sure that's a curved line. The problem with doing that is that you lose the fullness in the pattern. So this shortening technique will maintain the fullness of the skirt. When we are creating effectively new pattern pieces, it's a really good idea to copy your pattern that you're working with, so we've always got our original to go back to should anything go wrong or you need to refer it. So let's start with the lower back. Copy your piece out, make sure all your notch points are included, and label them from the upper part of the back going towards the hem. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now this will come in handy down the track, you'll see why. I'm going to assume we're going to shorten this by 15 centimeters, and 15 centimeters is, I believe, 5 15/16 of an inch. Now I'm going to work in metric because I always work in metric, but as much as I can I'll convert this to imperial for you. Once you've copied out your pattern piece, what we're going to do is get a new sheet of pattern paper and place it on your work surface. Now weight that down with pattern weights and trace around it. Now put these numbers on your new piece. Now to make this easy to see, what I'm going to do is work in Sharpie, which I normally wouldn't. So here is my hemline here. So we're going to measure up the amount you want to shorten it and place a small mark. So I'm going to measure up 15 centimeters here. So 15 centimeters is 5 15/16 of an inch. Now this is our fold line here, our centre back. What I'm going to do is take my original pattern, place the hem edge on that 15 centimeter mark, and then just make sure that the pattern is matching along that line here. Then I'm going to redraw in my hem following the existing pattern piece, but I'm only going to go around the edge and up as far as notch 5, and I'm going to mark that in there. Now what I need to do is find notch 2, and here is my notch 2 on my new pattern piece. What I'm going to do is place the original pattern so that 1 and 2 are on top of each other, Then I'm going to find the stitch line. So the stitch line is 6mm in from the edge. Effectively what we're going to do is pivot on the stitch line. So we hold point 2 at the 6mm quarter inch mark, excuse me, and then we swing the pattern out until the edge of it here touches the line here that we drew. And we're just going to redraw in our side seam like so. And here is our new pattern piece with our fullness maintained for the lower back. Now because we've adjusted the lower back, now we need to adjust the side front piece to match, so where it sews in here. So let's move on to that. So here is a copy of the shadow lower side front. Now this side here is the side that is closest to the center, and this side here is the side we're going to sew to the side, effectively the side seam. So if you go through and mark the notches 2, 3, 4 and 5, we can get started. Remember, it's always a good idea to keep your original pattern intact. So find a new sheet of pattern paper, place that pattern piece down, weight it down with your pattern weights and trace around it. Make sure you transfer those notch positions through. Now the first thing I want you to do is to take a set square or whatever measuring device you have and draw in the 6mm quarter inch stitch line at the top edge, because that's going to be our pivot point. So that's just a matter of doing this. And I'll mark that position in with a Sharpie here. So this is 2, 3, 4 and 5. So just like we did earlier, we decided to shorten this pattern up by 15 centimetres. Take your ruler and measure up 15 centimetres and place a small mark. Take your pattern piece, place the lower hemline on that mark, and just make sure that the centre edge sits exactly on top of the original. Draw in your new hemline. Now at the centre edge there'll be a notch here to show us the hem turn position, don't forget to include that. And just come across to the side and up slightly, like we did earlier. Now what we're going to do is come to the top edge here. On the 6mm line here, we're going to use that as a pivot point. So what we can do is put your original down, hold that down like so, and then just pivot your pattern out until it meets the mark at the lower edge, and we're going to redraw in our side seam. And that is how we shorten the shadow. Now there is one thing I do need to make a disclaimer for. As you can tell, we've added width here. Now it's not significant, and because it's a knit garment and it's lower on the hip, it should not affect the pattern too much, but just be aware we have added width, in theory we need to adjust the width of the centre front piece as well, but it is really minimal and it shouldn't affect your pattern, but it shouldn't affect the look of your garment, and without any major alterations, this is the best way of maintaining the fullness. If you're going to come up significantly more than, say, 15 centimetres, if you're going to come up 30 centimetres, so double that, that's like 11 inches, you're going to start to run into issues around here, which is the hip line, and then in which case, if you are going to go up more, you probably need to taper that seam down somewhat just to change that into a nice gentle curve. But this way your notch points will stay the same and it'll be easy to sew this into the pattern. So that's probably too much information. This adjustment will certainly maintain the fullness, and you'll get a lovely looking drape on that garment. So now we're going to move on to completing a full bust adjustment for this garment. As a disclaimer, what I'm going to say is the full bust adjustment we're going to do is probably only good for maybe 2, possibly 3 cup sizes. So the pattern's drafted for a B, so you can get away with a C. Don't really go above maybe an E, because if you do, we're going to have to adjust the length of the front to suit. But let's just move on and start the full bust adjustment. So let's start on a full bust adjustment. There's lots of different tutorials out there that can explain to you how to do a full bust adjustment. I could go on for a long time about why and when you need it. Basically, the rule of thumb is if the high bust is 2 inches, which is 5 centimetres different from the full bust, you need a full bust adjustment. What you tend to do is sew the garment up without any adjustments with spare fabric. So I call that a toile, a test garment. Some people call that a muslin. And you'll see if you've got lines radiating from the bust, in which case you need a full bust adjustment. My patterns are drafted for a B. I'm a C, and it's fine, so it's pretty much a full B. So to get down and dirty and really quick, what effectively we're doing is adding width here. When you've got a fuller bust than the pattern, what happens is the pattern can draw up in the front sits higher than it should, and you get lines radiating out. And the lines generally show you what needs to be done. So those of you with bigger busts, you'll know automatically whether you need a full bust adjustment for most patterns. Now, as a disclaimer, don't just go ahead and do full bust adjustments on any old pattern. I see people do it all the time. If you have, say, a drop shoulder or anything that's not fully fitted through the upper body area, don't just go and do it. Try the garment as is first and then decide. Right, now this is going to get a little bit too much information, but I do need to share that with you. So hopefully you'll all know, you may not, I'll run through it. So the high bust is the upper chest measurement. It's directly under the arm, and then the bust line is the fullest part of the bust, which is effectively the line that runs through the apex of the bust. Our bust point is the nipple. Right, so what we're going to do is, I actually need to step back a bit and say, when you choose a garment size for a top or a dress, it needs to fit correctly in the shoulder. So that's why a lot of pattern companies will say to you, choose your pattern based on the high bust, which is, effectively the chest. Don't just go on that. It must fit through the shoulder to get a lovely fit for the garment. Once your shoulder fits, you can adjust anything below the shoulder really easily. The hardest part is getting the shoulder to fit. So, too much information again, I know, I'm sorry. Sew a test garment in the size you think. If the shoulder fits, great. Mark the bust point with chalk or sticky tape while you're wearing the test garment. That will give you the most accurate representation of where the bust point is for you based on the fabric you're using. because of the stretch with no dart bust adjustments, you can run into problems. The other alternative is, because of negative ease, you can hold the pattern up to a mirror and guesstimate where the highest point of the bust is to find the bust point. For my pattern, on a size medium, my bust point is the intersect point of 9 centimeters and 25 centimeters from the shoulder neck point. Too much information again, I know, I'm sorry. What that means is, come to center front, measure out 9 centimeters. Now I'll put the imperial measurements on the screen below. I'm sorry, it's just easier for me to work in metric. So I put a series of 9 centimeter marks down and join them in a straight line. That's your 9 centimeter line. Now, come to the shoulder neck point. So that is on the sew line. So I'm just going to draw in my seam allowance, which is 6 mil, 1/4 inch. And all we do is measure down from that point. And you can use a tape measure if you prefer. We want to start at that point and come down until we touch that 9 centimeter line there. So I'll do this on the straight ruler. 25 and 9 will give us the intersect point for the bust point, which is here. So when we're doing a full bust adjustment, we need to open this area out to create width here. And it's really easy when you're dealing with woven fabrics, but it's a little bit harder when you've got stretchy knits. I'm going to give you approximates. All I can do with adjustments is to try it. Obviously the stretchier your fabric is, the less you'll need to open it up. As I said, too much information. Okay, so high bust point is the point, this line here, directly where our underarm hits our side seam. So we're going to square a line off from the center front, like so. And now we have our bust point, the intersect of 25 and 9. We square a line off on that line as well to the side seam. Now, to make sure our pattern will match down the track, we're going to add a notch into the side seam because we want to add fullness through here and not through the rest of the body. So we want to add fullness around the area where the bust is. And there's going to be too much information again. Now, when we draw in the bust circle, a medium bust circle is 8 centimeter radius. A large, as we go up per lineal size, so my mediums are 12, if we went up to the 14 it would be 9 centimeters, the next size up is 10 centimeters, so each size goes up by, each cup size goes up by 1 centimeter, and 1 centimeter is 3/8 of an inch. Too much information again, I'm sorry. Come to the bust point and measure down 8 centimeters. Because this would be where the lowest part of our bust circle is, and then square a line across to the side seam, and we're going to add a notch point here, and that notch point will just make us ease in our fabric in the correct place. Right, so you've made a test garment, and there's 2 ways of doing this full bust adjustment. It depends whether you've got a gaping armhole or not. This tutorial will be for a gaping armhole. My next example will be for a not gaping armhole. So don't go over maybe 1.5 inches on this, because then if it's any more than that it won't ease in nicely. We'll have to adjust the hemline. So 2, maybe 3 cup sizes. So we're going from a B, C, D, possibly an E. Don't do this for any greater. Between 2 and 4 inches, so just over 5 centimeters up, we're going to place a small mark to be a slash line. So now we need to open our pattern piece up to allow us to create this curve here for the extra fabric we need for the bust. What we're going to do is leave some hinge points on our pattern. Now generally when we do this we should be using a pattern piece that does not have seam allowances in it, but because this pattern piece has 6mm 1/4 inch seam allowances, it's a knit garment and it won't really be material. Generally what you'd do would be to cut in from the edge towards the stitch line and then cut up towards the stitch line. Your hinge point would be on the stitch line. I'm going to make the hinge point right on the edge. It shouldn't really be a problem. So the question remains, where do you cut? Now let's just have a look at the pattern again. So this is our high bust line here. This is our bust line. This is our bust point. And we'll be adding 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch per size. And this is the bottom of the radius notch here. So we are going to cut through from the centre front here towards the bust point, and then we are going to cut towards here, and we're going to leave a hinge point like this. Next we're going to cut from the side seam towards the bust point, leaving a hinge point here at the bust point. So a hinge point is about 3mm, 1/8 of an inch, and it just allows us to open the pattern piece up. So we'll cut like this. I'm going to go towards here. See what I mean by a hinge? And then we'll do the same here. And we're going to leave a hinge. So I'll pop that back again. So this means we can open our piece up. So what we need next is some new pattern paper. So place some pattern paper underneath your pattern. And now tape comes in very handy. So clear tape or stick glue, whatever you prefer. So I mentioned earlier we're going to open the pattern piece up by 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch per cup size, and we open it up between the bust point positions, the old bust point and the new bust point. So the best thing to do, because we need to keep everything nice and parallel, is to start by taping the lower piece down. Decide how much you want to open your piece up by. This is a B cup, so if you want to increase by a C cup, we're adding 1 centimetre. To a D, we're going to add 2 centimetres. So that's 3/8 of an inch per size. So when we open this up, the distance is the distance between these points here. But when we do that, we also need to make sure that this line here is parallel to this line here. So I'm just going to adjust this. So we'll measure 2 centimetres between the old and the new bust points, and I'll mark a spot there. And as you can tell here, that does not open 2 centimetres here. So we're looking at 2 centimetres here, 2 lots of 3/8 of an inch. So when you have that in the correct position, my tape is not playing nicely with me today. We'll tape that there, and then just make sure that this is parallel. I want to make sure that line is there. I'll just draw in a line and I will take that to there. Now automatically what you can see is I've added width to the front. I've also added depth. Now height is a good thing to add because the bust will pull up the fabric. We need to push it back down again. So what we're doing is effectively adding length here. So our new centre front line is this line here. I'll just take that down a teeny bit more. Our new centre front line is here. So because we kept that parallel, what you will see is we've added width here. So this is our new line for our centre front. And I'll just tape that there. And you can clearly see we've added width here. This is how much we've added, so this is why we need the notch here at the bottom to be able to ease this into the correct place. So when we adjust this pattern, we don't just draw a straight line like that because that would be ugly. What we do is we just create a nice gentle curve, and you just do that by eye and curve it back in until we get to that notch point. So what this means is, if we take the shadow tunic back that we created earlier, so here is the piece that we created earlier. Now this is the reason I marked in, and I'll just remark that in there, number 1. So this pattern piece here sews like this, and clearly we have a gap now here to here. So this is the reason we added the notch here. We need to know where to add the ease into. So if you take this back piece, place it on notch 1, mark in our new 8cm notch there. When you sew this, what you're going to be doing is easing the amount of fabric between there and there. You can tell we're going to ease that amount in. And what this does is it gives us the fullness where we need it, which is at the front of the garment. We don't want to add anything to the back of the garment. Now, as I said earlier, if this opens up any more than 1.5 inches, you're going to have to adjust the length here into a curve, which is going to be problematic because of where we sew the side front to. So really you can max out this at 2.5 cup sizes really. You can't go any further. So there we have it, the full bust adjustment tutorial. I know it's been a lot of a slog, for effectively all we're doing is adding a curve here. We just need to make sure we add the curve at the side seam on the front piece only in the correct position. As I said in the very beginning, the quick and dirty way is just to add extra fabric on the front piece here. But the main thing you need to remember is to ease it in the correct place, which is in the upper bust area. So this is the tutorial for a gaping armhole. So I'm going to very quickly go on to a tutorial where there's no gaping armhole. To do a full bust adjustment for a non-gaping armhole, find your bust point, and instead of taking the slash line up here between 2 and 4 inches, we're going to take the slash line right to the underarm point here. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave a hinge point here, and we're going to leave a hinge point here. decide how much you want to open this up by. So let's say we want to go up 1 cup size. I'm going to measure between my bust points. I'm going to make sure that when I secure that down, that the area from here to here is parallel. I'm going to place that on the ones. And remember, the amount we're opening is between the bust points. We will bring that through. So this is going from a B to a C cup, and this would also accommodate you know, a large C, so a D. Our new centre front line is like so. And clearly we only have a small amount to adjust here, and you still need to adjust the back. And by adjusting the back, what I mean is we need to make sure we add that notch in. So 0.1 would sew in there, 0.1 sews here, 0.2 sews here, and we just add our notch position here. So our notch here is like so, and there is our new pattern piece. So thanks for joining me. I hope those adjustments are useful for you, and I'll see you again soon.